Well, I have to tell you, when Father asked me to speak, he said, now, don't worry about having a formal talk or any of those kind of things. You have to spend days and days getting ready. So, this is not a formal talk. And, however, I was sort of felt that it was significant, let's put it that way, that the invitation came just as I had finished reading a book by Scott Hahn called Many Are Called. And it primarily talks about the fact that men especially have a call to fatherhood. And that fatherhood can be in marriage or in religion or anything else in it. But it's a call that everyone has come. And that set me thinking about my call. And I thought, well, let me talk about that, since I can do that without a lot of trouble. I have some notes so I don't wander too far afield. And I think that you're debating your call now to join in this men's group and go ahead with it. And there are many things back and forth about it. So I would like to tell you how I went about thinking about my call, to be a priest. I think God was calling me for quite some time, but I didn't have a hearing aid. I have to tell you, Dimitri said, would you mind if I tape you for TV? And the only time I was ever on TV, I was in Washington working for the National Catholic Education Association. And I had the TV on Sunday evening, and at the end of the TV, at the end of the news, they had the editorial from NBC. And so I listened to the editorial, and it was an editorial against aid to parochial schools. And he made the mistake, in my opinion, of saying we must always recognize that the constitutional wall of separation and state cannot be broken. So I sat down and wrote. They said, opinions to the contrary, we'd love to hear. So I wrote back and said, I don't know what Constitution he was talking about, but the U.S. Constitution does not have a wall of separation between church and state. It has a prohibition against an established religion, nothing else. The wall of separation was in a document published by Thomas Jefferson. The same Thomas Jefferson who at the time of Louisiana Purchase assured the Ursuline sisters in New Orleans that the United States would support their school just as the France had supported the school. Well, much to my shock, I was invited to come to NBC and record my little document. And I have to give them credit. You know, they doctored me up, made me look pretty good. And they gave me those things. I'm sure you all know it by now. The president has one of these things, and you don't see it when you're looking at it, but it's a bulletproof shield. And it contains his text, and they had it for my text too. Well, the interesting thing about that was that a week or so after this appeared, I appeared on TV, I get a phone call from the girl who I left crying on my doorstep when I went into seminary. And she was married and lived in Annapolis, Maryland, and saw this, and nothing would do, but I had to come to her house and meet her husband and 4 children and so on and so forth. And I ended up marrying 2 of the 4, the other 2 were already married, and burying her and her husband. All because of that TV. So I don't know what's going to happen as a result of this. Probably I'm going to be silenced by the bishop. Yeah. Anyway, I was from a Vincentian parish in Philadelphia, and they were priests who did missionary work, especially in those days in China. And so we all, from 4th grade on, you were an altar server, you know. And I remember I used to play priest. And my mother's silver cocktail service, I had one of those as a chalice, and the, what do you call those little wafers? We had the name now, but little candy things.
Yeah. Nickel wafers.
Yes. and that was the host, and my brother was the server. So that's how I started out in my vocation. And at the end of 8th grade, the Vincentians, you could go into seminary after 8th grade, and they had a high school seminary at Princeton, New Jersey. And at the end of 8th grade, I came home and announced, I'm going into seminary to be a priest. And my father said, and I quote, like hell you are, end quote. And so he said, you will go to St. Joe's Prep for a high school education. That's the end of that discussion. We didn't have any discussions, as you didn't either, you know. Today, everything's a family discussion. We didn't know discussions at all. And I went to St. Joe's Prep, and they had all kinds of things. They don't do them anymore. But anybody from Philadelphia here? Good. Anyway, the St. Joe's Prep was Jesuit prep school, and it was situated in what is now the inner city, very much the inner city. And next to it was a Jesuit church, parish church, which was run by the Jesuits. And every Friday, well, every Thursday, I should say, for getting things in order, we could go to confession if we needed to. Of course, we all needed to. And the church had a series of altars and confessionals all around. And in the confessional, you knelt in the confessional, went to confession, and when you were finished, there was a slot, and you got a card. And that enabled you to get back in the classroom. They're very trusting people, the Jesuits. Yeah. And then we had the Nights of the Blessed Sacrament. We had Mass and, of course, Communion on Fridays, every Friday. And as the priest came down the altar rail, my age is giving away here, came down the altar rail, you had one server with the plate and the priest, and the second server who handed you a card. And that card enabled you to go down and have coffee or a hot chocolate and a donut, and then go back to class late. So I was sort of brought up with the Blessed Sacrament. And I tell you that to you because when I graduated from high school, it was 1943, and there was a little thing like a war on. And instead of going into seminary, which the Jesuits wanted me to do, and I didn't want to do it with them because if I went into seminary, I wanted to be quote, a priest, meaning I took care of people in the parish and not taught kids in school. Now, in my 55 years of priesthood, I spent almost 30 of them in education. So much for that choice. Anyway, I went in the Navy, and I think God was watching out for me. There's no question of that in my mind anyway. And after I was finished with signalman school, you know, A, B, C, D, I can do it in my sleep. Somehow or other, this Congress had passed something called the V-12 bill. It was V-12 for Navy and A-12 for Army. We didn't have any Air Force in those days. It was Army Air Force, it wasn't the Air Force. And so there was a rider to the bill that said a certain percentage had to be from the fleet. So I am up in Sampson, New York, freezing to death. And we have this commander, Commodore. That was in the Second World War. The Navy has no one-star rank, so no brigadier general as such. You go from captain to 2 stars. Well, here they are in the war, and they don't want to do all these captains that they don't want to make admirals, so they called them Commodores. Well, they have John Paul Jones, I guess, but anyway, they called him Commodore. And he was thoroughly upset with everything that went on because he wasn't made admiral. And his view of how to do this was he summoned the graduating class of the signalman school and lined everybody up and said, everybody who finished high school, 1 step forward. Well, you know, there weren't many who finished high school. I was amazed at how many people did not finish high school. And then those of us who stepped forward, he went down, and where did you go? And I said, St. Joe's Prep. 1 step forward. And the other, I still remember the man's name, James Russell. And he went to Wyoming Prep, 1 step forward. Wyoming Prep is a Protestant prep school up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And with that, we were sent to V-12. And I figured, God, instead of being on a Murmansk run, getting sunk in the Pacific, bringing stuff to the Russians, I was cooling my heels at Cornell University, studying to be an officer in the Navy. Because The Navy required its officers to have 4 semesters of college in those days. And that was what I did. And then I ended up in getting out of the Navy when the war ended, and I went to another example of the democracy that existed in the Barrett household. I'm up at Cornell, so I figured I'm out. I signed up to finish Cornell. And about a week later, I get a call from my father. Where are you? Well, I'm up at Ithaca, New York. We are not staying there. Well, look, Dad, I've got a couple more semesters to go. Makes no difference. You're to come home. I should tell you, my father was a college professor. He said, I talked to the president of Penn, and I assured him you're an A student, and you damn well better be, and that you would fit right in, even though you were 2 weeks late coming. So down I went, and I took the train every day, and went to Penn, and came home, and it turned out the reason for this was that my mother had had a mastectomy, and my aunt, who lived with us, had a stroke. And so he was trying to earn a living and take care of the sick. So since I was a pre-med student, it would give me practice. That was, he said, practice. So I took the train down to Penn, took the train back, went upstairs. What are we going to have to eat? Went downstairs, down to the deli. We didn't have supermarkets. Back, upstairs. By the time this went on ended, I weighed 125 pounds. I mean, I didn't need a diet. I was up and down, up and down. Anyway, I'm doing this, and then I go to medical school. In all this time, I have to say, I was really, I still had this priest thing in the back of my mind, and I don't know, I wasn't too sure about it one way or the other. And then I thought, well, I really ought to start going to Mass. I don't mean on Sunday, of course I went to Mass on Sunday, but I thought I ought to go more often. So I went every day. And that meant getting up for 6 o'clock Mass, because I had to take the train down and the 8 o'clock class began. And so I did that, and I have to say, it gave my life some certainty. There was no question that as I came to grow closer to the Lord in the Eucharist, that I understood really what God wanted me to do. And in that sense, I decided, well, I'll apply for the seminary. It was quite a shock to the neighbors and to my girlfriend. But anyway, I applied for the seminary and almost didn't get in. You had to take a test to get in the seminary in those days in Philadelphia. And I'm out taking the test with all the other 50 or so, 60 people. And I'm looking at it, and it's an 8th grade test. And I just flipped the pencil down and said, well, I mean, I'm a big deal. I got a degree from the University of Pennsylvania, and you're telling me I need to take an 8th grade test. And the priest who was monitoring it came over and said, what's the matter, son? I said, if this is what it takes to get in here, I don't want to come in. Oh, he said, you're already in. Don't worry about it. Don't even bother. I'll take it. I'm already in. That was nice, Penn had some influence. Except the faculty were not really, they were sort of prejudiced against non-Catholic colleges, and Penn Ivy League in particular. So I had a little bit of a bad time with the faculty.